Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome in today's video. As I promised in my previous video when I did my quarterback tiers, the next one I'm doing is going to be on the running back position for your fantasy football drafts. They're going to be ramping up over these next couple of weeks. Let's just go ahead and dive into this video. The first tier that I'm going to be speaking about are running backs that I feel safe drafting as my RB1. It's Christian McCaffrey, Jonathan Taylor, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, and Saquon Barkley. I don't think I really got to talk up CMC. Obviously, there's a concern over the injury he has, but with his production that he's done over the last few years, I don't think you have to question it. There's always going to be a concern with injuries with running backs, but I wouldn't be too concerned over it. I expect that he'll be ready to go by week one. Jonathan Taylor, obviously he's been kind of banged up over the last couple years, but he's still been one of the most productive running backs over the last 3 seasons, which I'll be speaking about shortly. Breece Hall feels like this is his season where he's going to be able to be like a prime candidate to jump Christian McCaffrey to be the #1 running back in fantasy. So that's why I'm definitely would be comfortable in that position. I know Bijan Robinson wasn't utilized to what he could be as a rookie last year underneath Arthur Smith, but it sounds like with Raheem Morris and the new coaching staff, they're going to be utilizing not only as a running back, but him as a wide receiver as well. I kind of see them getting him a role kind of like how Christian McCaffrey does have out there in San Francisco. And then you do always have that concern with Saquon Barkley and his injury history, but the reason why I feel safe with him is they did give him that large contract, and as I've always said in previous seasons, sometimes you just want to follow the money, and if the team's willing to give him the money, they're going to want to give him the ball as much as possible. And I think with Jalen Hurts' rushing ability, that's going to open up rushing lanes for Saquon Barkley where he can have more ceiling games than floor games. Just like I did in my quarterback tier list, what I do during the summer is I always like to see who's been the most productive players over the last 3 years, and then once I go through the standard stats, finding the top 10 players at each position, I try to find unique stats where I can only find 4 players that can match these certain things that I look for. And Christian McCaffrey and Jonathan Taylor both popped up on some of my list. Christian McCaffrey is among 4 running backs that have at least 13 regular season games where they finished with at least 50 plus rushing yards and 25 plus receiving yards since 2021. He's also among 4 running backs that have at least 3,000 plus rushing yards and 800 plus receiving yards in the regular season over the last 3 years. Now, CMC and Jonathan Taylor, they're among 4 running backs that have at least 3,000 plus rushing yards and 30 plus total touchdowns since 2021. And then 2 stats for JT, he's among 4 running backs that have at least 14 regular season games where they finished with at least 75 plus rushing touchdowns and had at least a touchdown in those games. And lastly, JT is among 4 running backs that have at least 5 125 plus rushing yard performances in the regular season over the last 3 years. So yeah, CMC and JT I feel very safe with, and like I said, I'm very high on Breece Hall heading in this year, as well as Bijan Robinson and Saquon Barkley. Moving into this next tier, these are running backs I'd take a shot on as my RB1. Say I did miss out in the previous 5 running backs I just mentioned. If I had to draft one of these guys as my RB1, I'd feel okay with it. Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Jahmyr Gibbs, and James Cook. Obviously, you think like, oh, Cody, you don't feel safe about Derrick Henry, but you have to admit he's up there in age. There's always the injury factory now with him being up there, but with him going to join Lamar Jackson, I'd still be able to. I still would be willing to take a shot on him in that RB1 slot on my depth chart. Same thing with Josh Jacobs. He does have an injury history, but I think he's going to a great system that's going to utilize his skill set and get the best out of him as long as he remains on the field. So that's why I'm willing to take a shot on him. Now, Jahmyr Gibbs, I did put my tier list together before that news report came out about his hamstring injury. So there is a slight concern with Gibbs right now. Adam Schefter was on the Pat McAfee show today. He said as of right now, they do not know the extent of it, but Schefter said he would guess that we won't see Gibbs for the rest of the preseason, and as they will try to get him ready for the Week 1 matchup. But I'll go ahead and say this too. I put him in this with me projecting that we're going to see kind of the Lions split the touches between him and David Montgomery. But I think just because Gibbs is more efficient with his touches, I kind of see Gibbs overtaking Montgomery on touches more towards like the half of the season, where he blows up in the second half of the season, which will place him as a RB1 by the end of the season. So that's why I'm not too concerned over the hamstring injury right now. Even if he does have to miss the first like week or two, I could still see him ending up finishing as an RB1. And James Cook, I just really like what I've seen from the kid in his first couple of years in the league. And then now with this whole change in the offense up there in Buffalo, I think they're going to utilize James Cook a lot, especially in the passing game. So if you're in like half point or full PPR leagues, I think James Cook is going to really blow up, and he's going to help people win games this year. And he's a candidate I see finishing as a top 10 running back in fantasy. Now, speaking of the stats I just mentioned in the previous tier, all four of these backs popped up in my research this summer. Starting with Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry is among one of those four running backs that have at least 3,000 plus rushing yards and 30 plus total touchdowns over the last 3 years. He's also one of the four running backs that have at least 14 regular season games with at least 75 plus rushing yards and at least a touchdown in a game since 2021. And then Josh Jacobs, he's actually one of the four running backs that have at least 13 regular season games where he finished with 50 plus rushing yards and 25 receiving yards. He's also among the four running backs that have over 3,000 rushing yards and 800 receiving yards over the regular season. I do think Josh Jacobs I don't think people factor in how good of a receiving back he is, which is I think why I really like him going to the Packers. When you think about how they utilize Aaron Jones in the passing attack, Josh Jacobs is going to see a similar type of role in that offense. And then Henry and Jacobs, they're both among the they're with JT as one of the four running backs that have at least 125 plus rushing yard performances in the regular season over the last 3 years. And then Gibbs and Cook, they're actually among four running backs that average at least 5 yards per carry, a minimum of 160 attempts, and at least 5 yards per reception, a minimum of 50 receptions since 2021. So that is something to keep in mind for both of them. So yeah, that is that tier. Moving on to the next one. This is just a solo tier. There was more running backs in this tier in my last year's video, but this is the only guy that you probably need to monitor right now. Monitor this running back situations tier, which is Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb's obviously returning from that gruesome injury, but it sounds like he is making progress. He is currently on the PUP list. If he does remain on the PUP list come the 53-man cut down date, which is on August 27th, he will have to miss at least the first 4 weeks, so that's something to monitor. But if you do have if you're in a league where you have an IR spot, obviously I don't expect Chubb to go high in drafts, so if you do land a couple running backs, I would definitely consider drafting Chubb and sliding him into your IR so you can create an open spot on your bench if your league does allow that. Now, speaking of Chubb, there's some stats that he's involved with. He is among the four running backs with at least 14 regular season games where they finished with at least 75 plus rushing yards and at least a touchdown over the last 3 years. He's also one of the four running backs that have at least have more than 525 plus yard rushing performances in the regular seasons over the last 3 years. And he also is joined with James Cook and Jahmyr Gibbs, where he is one of the players that average at least 5 yards per carry and 5 yards per reception since 2021. Again, minimum of 160 attempts on those rushing attempts and a minimum of 50 receptions. So yeah, Chubb, you're definitely going to be taking a chance on him, but he shouldn't be going too high because of his injury he's returning from. When we get a player of that caliber, he's always worth a stash on your bench. Like I said too, especially if you do have an IR spot in your league where you can at least put him on the IR in the first 4 weeks if he does remain on the PUP list. Moving into this next tier, these are running backs that offer a high ceiling as an RB2 tier. Now, I will say some of these running backs, I don't know if you want to draft them and slide them into your RB2 to start the season. I think maybe some of them might be more flex plays, and then once you kind of get into the season and you see how their role involves, that's when you can slide them up into your RB2 spot. And I think as I view all these players as well, most of the players outside DeAndre Swift as players that, as the season goes along, you're going to feel comfortable putting them in your RB2 spot because they offer that high ceiling and can help you win games throughout the season. Obviously, Devin Achane, we saw what he could do when he is healthy, when he's on the field. The biggest concern with him, though, he is splitting reps with Raheem Mostert. There's this rookie I'm going to mention as well, but I do think he's worth a shot just because of the type of efficiency that he did have last year. DeAndre Swift, maybe this is a guy I just cannot quit on. Obviously, he had that big catch in that preseason game for the Bears this past weekend. And I did see a report that the beat writers out there in Chicago are expecting that DeAndre Swift is going to catch a lot of balls this season, which actually utilizes his type of game. That's why I like him this year, especially in the half-point full PPR leagues. I think he's going to bring tremendous value. I think he's going to be a safety valve for Caleb Williams in his rookie season. Jaylen Warren will be splitting reps with Najee Harris. I think he offers a higher ceiling than Najee Harris. And speaking of Jaylen Warren, he's one of those 4 running backs that average at least 5 yards per carry and the 5 yards per reception since 2021. Again, just in case you missed the first part, that's a minimum of 160 attempts and a minimum of 50 receptions. Tyjae Spears, I skipped over Chase Brown. He's going to be splitting reps probably 50-50, it sounds like, with Zach Moss to start the season. But he is so much more explosive than Moss. I think if Moss cannot hit the ground running, I would not be surprised if Brown overtakes him and gets the most touches out of that backfield. And he does offer more of a value than Moss just because of his receiving ability. Same thing with Tyjae Spears. I really like what I saw from him. Actually, I'll go ahead and mention this. Jaylen Warren, Chase Brown, and Tyjae Spears, all 3 of them were in my video where I talked about running backs that draft late. If you have not watched that, they came out about 3 to 4 weeks ago. Just go back on my channel if you want to hear more stats on them and how I do feel about them in deep. And then Zamir White, I put him in this section because I really like what I saw from that kid for the Raiders last year. There is one rookie running back to keep an eye on in the Las Vegas backfield, but I do like Zamir White because I could see him being the leading the team in touches out of the backfield by the end of the year, which is why I think he does offer a high ceiling, and I do expect that he's going to be entering the season as a starter for them. So that's why I did include him in this section. Moving into the next tier, these are running backs I believe that offer you a high floor as RB2. These are a lot of these guys. If you wanted to draft them and then draft one of the previous running backs in my tier, in the high ceiling tier, that would make a lot of sense because they would give you a safe start to the season while you wait for the guys with a high ceiling to kind of get comfortable and hitting the ground running. But these are guys I expect that can at least produce for you to start the year. Alvin Kamara, obviously we know what he is. Najee Harris, Joe Mixon, David Montgomery. Again, Montgomery might provide you more value if Gibbs does have to miss some time. Travis Etienne Jr., James Conner, Ramondre Stevenson, Kyren Williams. I included Austin Eckler and Brian Robinson Jr. together because I kind of expect them to split the backfield to at least start the year. Kenneth Walker, Tony Pollard, Isaiah Pacheco. Same thing with Aaron Jones and Ty Chandler. It sounds like those 2 running backs will be splitting time, about a 50-50 share in that backfield. Rashad White, Zach Moss, Javonte Williams, and Raheem Mostert. I feel like all of these running backs I just ran over, they're very safe options for you to draft and put into your RB2 spot to start the year. And then, but I just don't know. I just have my concerns over some of them. How high is their ceiling? I do think there's some other options in the backfield that could take away from them. And then also, I do have some questions and concerns over some of their offenses. Now, some of these guys did pop up on my stats in the research I did this summer. It was Alvin Kamara, Najee Harris, Joe Mixon, and Austin Eckler. Just running over those stats, Alvin Kamara and Austin Eckler, they're among the 4 running backs that have at least 13 regular season games where they finish with at least 50 plus rushing yards and 25 plus receiving yards over the last 3 years. Joe Mixon is actually among the 4 running backs that have 3,000 plus rushing yards and 30 plus total touchdowns since 2021. Joe Mixon and Najee Harris, they're actually among the 4 running backs that have 3,000 plus rushing yards and 800 plus receiving yards over the last 3 years. And lastly, Najee Harris is among the 4 running backs that have at least 14 regular season games where they finish with 75 plus rushing yards and a touchdown. So again, some of these guys, they do have the capability of finishing as an RB1. I just would feel more comfortable as these guys in my RB2 spot. Like I just if any of these guys probably were in my RB1 spot, I would feel very leery about that, and I would want to try to acquire one of the guys I already spoke about. Again, I think that the best bet for you to do would draft one of these guys as your RB2, and then in the previous section or previous tier I just talked about, draft one of those guys as a flex option on your bench, and then eventually they should be able to take over one of these guys as your RB2, and then the players in this tier you could slide down into your flex option. Moving into the next tier, these are top handcuff running back tiers. I don't have no stats on these because these guys are they're currently RB2s on their rosters. But yeah, the top one though, Jerome Ford, he is the handcuff to Nick Chubb. So if you are going to plan on drafting Nick Chubb, you definitely want to get Jerome Ford so you can have Jerome Ford in your lineup. He was highly productive when Chubb was hurt last year. He was fantasy relevant, so that's something to keep in mind. Jordan Mason is likely going to be your best option if you draft CMC as a handcuff. Obviously, with him dealing with a calf strain, like I mentioned, it sounds like CMC should be ready, but if you want some insurance in case CMC is not ready by the beginning of the year, I would draft Jordan Mason. I probably would too, just because CMC is already dealing with a calf strain, so you just do have some insurance for you if CMC is going to be battling with injuries this year. Tyler Algier, we've seen him be productive before, so if you draft Bijan Robinson, if you want insurance, I would draft him. And then these are some rookie running backs I like. Trey Benson as a handcuff to James Conner, Blake Corum as a handcuff to Kyren Williams. Braylon Allen, I'm always going to be a fan of him. I'm a Wisconsin Badger fan. I love what that kid did during his time up there in Madison, and he looked really good this past weekend for the Jets. So he's definitely going to be the top handcuff to have to Breece Hall. Will Shipley, it sounds like he's about to earn the backup running back role to Saquon Barkley. Like I've talked about, there's obviously concern with Saquon Barkley's injury history. So if you do have that concern, you do draft Saquon Barkley as your RB1. If you want to give yourself insurance, I would definitely try to get Will Shipley on your bench. Bucky Irving is the handcuff to Rachaad White. Ray Davis is your handcuff to James Cook. Justice Hill, keep an eye on that because John Harbaugh did talk him up this summer, and he is going to be your handcuff to Derrick Henry if you don't feel safe with him as your RB1. Then Khalil Herbert to DeAndre Swift. Antonio Gibson to Ramondre Stevenson. Zach Charbonnet's the handcuff to Kenneth Walker. Jaleel McLaughlin to Javonte Williams. Dameon Pierce to Joe Mixon. Mixon is back at practice, but he was kind of banged up this summer, so that's something to monitor if you end up drafting Joe Mixon as your RB2. If you don't find a guy to stash on your bench, maybe you go ahead and get the handcuff in Pierce. Jamal Williams to Alvin Kamara. Not too excited about that, but there's not a lot of proven guys in that backfield, so if Kamara does have to miss time, we've seen a couple years ago when he was at Detroit, Jamal Williams has the capability of racking up touchdowns. Deneric Prince is going to be Isaiah Pacheco's handcuff. Now, Deneric Prince might, depending on the size of your leagues, I'll go ahead and say this, some of these guys might be able to be on the waivers for you, but if you do end up with the starters above some of these guys as your RB1, you might want to get a handcuff just in case. And then Tank Bigsby, it sounds like he's having a good training camp down there in Jacksonville. So if you don't feel safe with Travis Etienne as your RB2, just for injury concerns, I would definitely consider getting Bigsby on your bench. Now, moving into the next section, These are running backs to stash on your bench tier. Some of these guys, though, I will go. I'll talk about it. They could easily end up being a high floor RB2 option for you to start the year, or these guys can be RB2s that can slide in, or some of these guys can be handcuff options. And the reason why I put a lot of these guys in the tier is just because we don't really know what their role is quite yet. Speaking of these top trio of guys, Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, and Kamani Vidal for the Chargers. We do know with John Harbaugh, he's going to want to run the ball. And especially with Justin Herbert's injury, they're not going to want to put too much pressure at the beginning of the season on Herbert. I would expect Gus Edwards to be the starter, but he is dealing with an injury right now. We all know the talent that J.K. Dobbins has. It's just all about him staying healthy. And there's a lot to like what the rookie running back in Kamani Vidal can bring. Likely, you can get Vidal off the waivers, I'm thinking, into the season, but I would definitely consider drafting a Gus Edwards and a J.K. Dobbins. Maybe leave them on your bench in the first couple weeks while you kind of see how this backfield's going to look like in L.A. for the Chargers. For the Cowboys, is it going to be Ezekiel Elliott or Rico Dowdle? I really like what Rico Dowdle showed last year. I would prefer Rico Dowdle because I think he kind of offers a higher ceiling at this point, but I would understand stashing Ezekiel Elliott on your bench. He knows the offense. He's knows the team. They're very comfortable with him, so I wouldn't be surprised if he does end up leading the team in touches by the end of the year. More of a high volume play for you, a player that you can slide in if your running backs do suffer injuries or if you get into the bye week. The next set of guys, it sounds like Devin Singletary will be the starter for the Giants. I kind of see this as a running back by committee to start the year. Maybe Singletary dominates the touches, but then I think one of these younger running backs are going to overtake him at some point of the year. Luckily, Tyrone Tracy Jr. survived that scare that came out today. It sounded like his season was going to be done. Now it sounds like he's just dealing with a low ankle sprain, and he's going to be week to week. I really like what he showed in his preseason game. Same thing with Eric Gray, where he showed some positive things as a receiver. So yeah, I would honestly, between the three, I would prefer Tracy Jr. and then maybe Eric Gray to stash on my bench. But if you don't really if you end up drafting maybe like one of the RB2s with a high ceiling, and then if you want to draft Devin Singletary to get you through the first month to 2 months of the year and to play as your RB2, to maybe play as a flex in your lineup, I would definitely understand that. And then I'm not sure who's going to be the handcuff to Josh Jacobs. I prefer Marshawn Lloyd over AJ Dillon just because Marshawn Lloyd does offer a higher floor because of his receiving ability and what he can do in that Matt LaFleur offense. But I include AJ Dillon because they did bring him back. It sounds like he did lean down. I know LaFleur was talking him up earlier in this summer, and then obviously, like I said, Jacobs does have that injury history, so you may have to count on your handcuffs. So one of these guys will be the handcuff. We just maybe got to wait and see how it plays out in the first month of the year. Over in Carolina, Chuba Hubbard is likely going to be starting at the beginning of the year. I think he is a guy that you could slide into your RB2 spot to at least start the season. Now, Jonathan Brooks is going to miss at least the first 3 or 4 weeks. Their rookie running back out of Texas. But once he's in, he probably won't provide value until about the second half of the year, because even if he's available to play after 4 weeks, he's coming off that injury. They're going to ease him in. They're going to get him more comfortable in the offense. But I would not be surprised if we get to the second half of the year and he's starting to take more and more touches from Hubbard, and he's starting to be an explosive playmaker on an offense that is desperate for playmakers to have. Dylan Lobb, I might have mispronounced it, or Alexander Madison. One of those two guys are going to be the handcuff to Zamir White. I prefer Dylan because there was a report that he is already working with the first team offense in training camp, working as a third down back. We already know what Alexander Madison is. So if I was going to take a chance on a handcuff, I would prefer Dylan for Zamir White. I also do understand Madison. They did bring him in. He could be a touchdown vulture in that offense. But if you wanted to go shoot for the ceiling as a handcuff to Zamir White, I would go after Dylan. And then Jalen Wright, I kind of talked about him earlier. He's a rookie running back out of Tennessee for the Miami Dolphins. He's a clear stash player, but with Raheem Mostert and Devin Achane, both of those guys have kind of missed time. Obviously Achane missed time last year as a rookie because of injuries. Mostert's he has his stretches where he's healthy. Then he also has his times where he's missed injuries. So if either of those two guys got to miss time this year, all of a sudden you get Jalen Wright, a young rookie running back that's going to be in an offense that I think can utilize his skill set and he can provide value for you. But honestly, Jalen Wright, he might be a guy that you can just keep an eye on him. He's probably going to be available on the waivers into the season. So yeah, those are my running back tiers. If you guys enjoyed the video, hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed to my social media channels, hit subscribe or follow depending on whatever you're watching this on. As always, guys, what I'll be doing next, I'll be doing the wide receiver tier video. As of right now, I am planning on getting that out to you guys at some point this Saturday, more than likely. And then I'll be doing my tight end video next week for you. And then I'll be doing my top streamable defenses for week 1, defenses to leave your draft with. But other than that, you have any questions, concerns, shoot a DM. I always try to get back to people as soon as I can. I hope you guys enjoy your day, your night, your weekend, your week, whenever you're watching this. Peace out.